Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great day. This is your host, Jamie Clarkson. Let's find your major. Today we're joined by my friend Sydney. She studies the intricacies of the most defining feature of our beings, the brain. With her major in cellular and molecular neuroscience, she has taken her studies from the classroom to the lab to internships across the country. So, welcome Sydney. It's nice to have you.
Hi, thanks, Jamie.
So, actually, I want to let you know that you are the first guest that we've had on the podcast that isn't an OU student. You go to Ohio State.
It's good to be here.
Which is like a touch of betrayal, but it's nice to get a new perspective. On top of the fact that you go to a different school, you have like a wildly different major than any of the other guests that I've had on before.
Yeah.
Like, you're in the STEM field, and I literally haven't touched STEM at all with the podcast. So I'm glad to christen it in with some neuroscience.
Welcome.
All right. So as always with the podcast, I like to begin the interview or the conversation talking about the end game of the major, because usually when people choose what major they want to do, they are like, okay, what job will I get with it at the end of it, which is, that's a reasonable thing to ask first. So what are some of the jobs that you can get with neuroscience?
So neuroscience is typically used as like a stepping stone major. So a lot of people in neuroscience are pre-professional. So whether that's grad school, pre-PhD, pre-med, even pre-vet sometimes too. But as far as if you don't want to do anything after undergrad, it's pretty much just used as like another biological sciences degree. So really what you want to do with that.
Yeah. So what are some of the directions that you see some people going in most often?
So most often the three, like I said earlier, are grad school, pre-PhD, or pre-med. So for pre-med, a lot of people are already interested in maybe pursuing a career in neurology or neurosurgery, that kind of thing. Pre-PhD is pretty much you want to be in a research lab for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And then grad school, that can be anything from like a radiology type thing or pathology, something also in the medical field, but not necessarily becoming a doctor.
Right. So, like, neuroscience, can people use that as a stepping stone to be kind of like a general doctor, or is it so specific that you kind of have to go into like brain medicine essentially?
No, it's very generalized because if you're going into pre-med, you all start at the same level. So for the first 2 years of med school, you're going to be taking your normal classes, and then the last 2 years really kind of getting into what specialty you want, whether that's neuroscience or not. It's just typically something people are already interested in because it is a very specialized or specific major, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to end up in that, but it gives you a good idea if you want to.
And like, what are some of the oddball jobs that people end up with? Like some things that people normally don't think about.
Oh man. Well, there is definitely like the forensic side, like with neuroscience and stuff like that, you can end up working in a morgue or that like medical examiner type thing is pretty interesting. But other than that, it's pretty
straightforward.
Yeah.
I know you're going down kind of a different route than you intended. Do you want to talk on that a little bit?
Yes. It has been a journey.
It's been a very recent change too, right?
Yes, just this past year. So I came in to Ohio State neuroscience pre-med. So I knew I wanted to go to medical school from the very beginning. I knew that I wanted to do neurology type thing. Like that was pretty much the only path that I had really thought about. There weren't any questions. So pretty much when you start out with neuroscience at Ohio State, there's 3 different specialties you can do. So behavioral, cellular and molecular, and then cognitive and computational neuroscience. And so
you're cellular and molecular, right?
Yeah, I'm cellular and molecular.
Nice.
So behavioral is more of like your different mental disorders, the kind of stuff you learn in psych in high school. So that is a very popular one, obviously, because those are very interesting things to learn about. Cognitive and computational is more of your artificial intelligence type thing or math related, which wasn't really my idea of a good time.
And don't blame you.
And then cellular molecular is exactly how it sounds. It takes it down to the very core basics pretty much of neuroscience. So like how different drugs affect your body and your brain, or like why you pretty much are the way you are. So I really like that. But you take a class at least how it is at Ohio State, you take a class in each of those different specialties in the pre-major before you're actually in there to really determine what you want to do. But along with that, you're taking all the pre-med courses at the same time. So you're taking your chemistries, both general and organic. You're taking biology, physics, all that stuff at the same time. So with the idea of it being you're finished with all your pre-med requirements pretty early on. And so the more I was in those classes, it's like, okay, you know, I'm getting through them and stuff, still want to be pre-med. But a big thing that I would recommend, especially if you're in that sort of STEM program or want to pursue that, is volunteering and shadowing, that kind of stuff. And not just if you're pre-med, don't just volunteer doctors.
Yeah.
Because you're only going to see one side of it. Like volunteer with a nurse or shadow like a physician's assistant or something like that. And so the more I started shadowing, it was like, I don't know. It's something that you have to be, I think, 100% committed to once you commit to that. But you also have to be super open to exploration, because it seems like the type of person who ends up going into the pre-med is like, that's the only option. And if they change that, they're going to disappoint people or that kind of stuff. But that's how you get burnout, and then it's no fun. So use it as a chance to explore other options and other paths. So I actually started shadowing at a surgical pathology lab at the James Cancer Center in Columbus, which I had no idea what that even was. So pretty much whenever you have a biopsy or something removed, or you're going in for surgery, or you have cancer, or you don't know if it's cancer yet, they take those subjects, if you will, or the pieces of the body, and pretty much take it into this lab, dissect it, diagnose it, and then that goes back to the patient. Or if they're in surgery at that point and they don't know, should I cut further? Should I stop? That all goes back to this lab. So really, after shadowing in there and kind of getting to know, it's a really cool thing, because that's obviously has to happen for pretty much any sort of medical procedure, but you never think about it. So I was looking into that more, and I'm actually going to be pursuing then a master's in pathology to hopefully work in one of those labs. So still medical field, but a little different.
It's the same starting off point, but it's wildly different endpoints. And that's what I think is interesting about like biology and kind of the medical field, is like you can start in one thing, but it's, I wouldn't say that it's easy to branch off into something else, but like you have that room to do that.
Yeah, but definitely use that, because I feel like a lot of people get stuck into people only go to medical school, or people only do the PhD one way, when in reality, like if you feel like you need to take a year off to try something else, or to even, you don't want to take all the same classes at one point, or you want to take a gap year after undergrad, like totally do that. It's not just one straight path. So
and we'll talk a little bit more about the grad school side of things a bit later. One question I always like to ask, and this may be a hard question for you to answer, because you know, obviously there's a million different outcomes with neuroscience, but typically when you get a career in medicine through neuroscience, is this like a field that you have to relocate for? Because there are some people who go into, you know, they want to find a job where they have to relocate to a big city because that's an excuse to, you know, go wherever. And then there are some people who kind of want to stay in their hometown. So like, is this the right field for somebody who wants to stay, or the right field for somebody who wants to go? Kind of, you know, what's that situation about?
I think for like neuroscience specifically, it's pretty much whatever you want to do, because it is one of those things that's pretty much located anywhere. So it's kind of one of those things where, do I want to work in a hospital, or would I rather work in like a small just family practice or something like that? Whatever you want to do, pretty much. One thing though is, I know a lot of people go to grad school or whatever they want to do in the same area that they might possibly be looking for a job for. So like, I want to go to grad school in this city because they have a good placement rate after graduation to get a job at that same hospital. So kind of looking to where, going to where you would want to end up is a good idea, especially if you are offered a job eventually at that place.
Nice. Sorry, I'm trying to think. I think now would be a good time to move on to kind of the major experience. This would probably be a good time to talk about grad school. So we talked about it a little bit, how there's like the different paths you can do, PhD, medical school, things like that. I think it's pretty safe to say that grad school in some capacity is basically required with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you want to go on to do more specialized work in that specific field, I think. But other than that, like, even if you don't want to, or you don't really know what you want to do, but you know that you want to be in the sciences, it's a really cool major. Because, I mean, the brain, it named itself.
That is very meta.
It makes you, and to be able to learn about all that kind of stuff. And the really cool thing about it, too, is it's such a new field.
Yeah.
So people are still doing really relevant research about it. We don't know why we are the way we are. A lot of that is very new, and especially with different relevant topics like the whole medical marijuana thing now, and it's all very neuro related. So being able to talk about all those topics and stuff too is pretty cool.
And I just remembered there was one thing that I wanted to ask you about. So let's circle back to, you were talking about the different specializations that OSU in particular kind of has. And I forgot to mention this at the top of the podcast, but you can only speak to your experience at, your experience and then your experience at your university. So of course this is going to be different, but you're sharing your experience, to say the word again. But, so anybody who's listening, I guess take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, it's not all the same.
It's not all the same.
I mean, the core part and the classes and stuff probably are, but I'm sure there's plenty of different specializations and stuff like that you can do at other places too.
And with that, my question is, you mentioned, was it called behavioral neuroscience?
That's one of the specializations, yeah.
So what's the difference between behavioral neuroscience and just psychology as a discipline?
Yeah, so a lot of the classes you do have to take kind of overlap with the psychology department, but psychology is more, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it doesn't really go into more of the actual science behind it. It's more of like, okay, this is why this person is acting this way, and these are different tests we can do to maybe like diagnose that, or to kind of look more into it. Or I know, like, in one of my first year psychology, just normal psychology courses, you learn about like dopamine just being like a mood neurotransmitter or something like that. Like, that's what makes you happy. But then you really get into the neuroscience of it, and it's like, well, it does make you happy, but we don't know if it's because of dopamine,
right?
And dopamine's also really involved in movement. So is it mood, or is it movement, or is it both? And so you really get into more of like the nitty gritty type stuff with it.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, but it does overlap quite a bit.
So do people who, I imagine that people who go into behavioral neuroscience may not always end up being a psychiatrist or whatever that is. It's more, I guess, research based then. Would it?
Yeah, it can be, or it's more just of they want to get more into why the person is behaving that way, and like specifically like different regions of the brain that could be contributing to that, or that kind of thing, rather than just like learning. I mean, you're still learning about the different like mental disorders and that kind of stuff, which is definitely very relevant to learn about like anxiety and that kind of stuff, because a lot of college students go through that. So it's definitely very relevant, but there's a lot of overlap, so it really just depends on where you want to take that.
Interesting. We had, I don't think it was our last, I can't remember. We did have an episode with my friend Kennedy, and she was in like child and family sciences, or child and family studies, but there was a lot of overlap with psychology, but in a different way. It was more like you said, it was, psychology is more about, I guess, about treating it and about like, counseling and things like that. But it's like they took one step further, and it's pretty much counseling, and it's guidance, and it's I don't know, that's weird that you guys can both have overlap into psychology, but in just bonkers different ways. All right, so let's talk about your time in the major specifically. So I'd like to talk about like your experience studying it, because that's a very important thing.
Yeah.
So we already talked a little bit about like biology and chemistry, but what types of classes do you take to fulfill this?
So there's actually a really wide variety.
Yeah.
The cool thing, at least about Ohio State, is once you declare your specialization, so like mine is cellular and molecular, you get to pick from a list like what different classes from that specialization you want to take.
Okay.
So there's pretty much everything. I've taken psychopharmacology courses.
That's
so
a big word.
Yeah. So pretty much how drugs, and that can be good and bad, how they affect your nervous system. There's different sleep-wake cycle classes that you can take, more of the cognitive classes, so like learning about learning.
Yeah.
And then
the brain named itself, and now you get to learn about learning.
Yes, exactly. And just kind of all those different things. More of the behavioral, you can get into more of like the genetic type things. Like there's a lot of overlap with all the sciences. I'm going to be taking a neurophysiology course.
Yeah.
So
how do you choose, like you do have like that kind of like that pool of different classes that you get to choose from. How do you choose that specifically? Is it like whatever tickles your fancy, or like are you taking these classes with the intention of having a more specialized or like more neatly tailored?
Yeah. Well, once you pick your specialization, it's definitely like all going to be geared towards almost one sort of thing, but also you get to pick from a lot of different topics within that. So as far as like learning about circadian rhythm type things, or like why we're awake when we are and sleepy the way like we know when we are, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you get like a very well-rounded knowledge of the subject, I guess, because there's so much to learn about within it. And obviously it's not just the brain, it's the spinal cord too, so that's like all your nerves. And so one of the things that drew me to the major is because I love anatomy. In which at our high school you really don't get a lot of.
Right, I forgot. Okay, so I was just the worst student at being well-rounded, so I took exactly as many sciences and exactly as many maths as I needed, and then I dipped. Like there were I think there were 2 science classes that were mostly optional, and it was like some sort of anatomy type class. Yeah, it was
just like a biology class, but with some anatomy.
Yeah, and then there was like a physics class, which I super didn't want to do that. Looking back, I kind of wish I had, rounded out my course load there a little, but what's the point? But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, so
anatomy.
Yeah, good stuff. So in high school, just kind of starting to learn about that really got me interested into more of like, I want to study anatomy, or just because the human body is just so cool.
Yeah.
So then being able to study something specifically within that, neuroscience and like the brain and that kind of stuff is really cool. So there's a lot of different like neuroanatomy courses you can take, or if you want to expand that further and just take a more generalized anatomy classes are really cool too. So a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything. So besides the kind of specialization classes, what are some of like the baseline classes that you have to take for neuroscience in general?
So definitely an intro psychology is usually recommended, which then when you get into the major, it's like, this doesn't mean anything. So forget about everything.
Oh my God.
So yeah, that, and then just typically more of your generalized, so like a very basic behavioral neuroscience class where you talk about like the different like emotions maybe, or something like that, or like schizophrenia, that kind of stuff. And then at least as Ohio State has it, then you talk about the cellular stuff. And yeah, so just a little bit of everything. But as far as like outside of neuroscience courses or psychology, there wasn't really anything that you need to prepare for it.
Right. I remember when you first started, and what like threw me off is, so it's not a stretch to say for most majors, you start by taking general ed classes. And especially for my experience, I almost exclusively was taking general ed classes and not journalism classes.
Yeah.
But I'm talking to you and you're taking like OChem and pre-med classes and all of that, like the first semester. Do you want to talk about that a little bit for me?
So the way they have it set up is you're taking your Because at Ohio State, neuroscience isn't a major that you just get into. It's a
Right.
pre-major for the first year. So at the end of the year, dependent on your neuroscience grades in those 3 classes and your overall GPA is whether you get into the program or not. But they also have you start out with all the pre-med courses. So you're taking 18 credit hours your first 2 semesters of school, and that really messed me up.
Right.
Like,
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I think the normal number that people take is like 15.
Yeah.
So it's like 5 classes. So for you, that would be like, what, like 6 or 7?
Actually, I think there was
Or-
only 4 or 5, but they were worth more credit hours.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
God.
So
It sounds unpleasant nonetheless.
yeah, it's one of those things where, especially like I never did any sort of college courses or stuff during high school, so I really had no idea what to expect. And
It's quite the thing to jump into.
it was a wake up call. Like
Right.
I know definitely having like chemistry in high school and then taking a general chemistry course my first semester, I'm like, this will be no problem. It's just going to be a couple steps up. And then you get your first exam grade back and it's like a 30%, which is only
Right.
like 20% below the class average. But
Right.
it's definitely a wake up call. And especially the different pre-med programs and stuff where it's just so time consuming and you think that like, oh my gosh, if I have to take this again, I'm going to be behind or I'm never going to get into what I want. But really just kind of just move on from it. And just, I think the worst thing to do is just dwell on the fact that like something went wrong and just kind of accept that something will happen at some point.
Right.
And then that's just kind of something you're going to have to work through and obviously be better after it. But definitely also the first year, even though it seems like a lot, I'd say get involved in maybe trying to find a research lab or something like that, because the more you start to experience or the more different opportunities and paths you have, that you might get a more specific idea of what you want to do. So.
Yeah. And there's a benefit to having like in tandem the classroom education and then the hands-on education.
Yeah, because then you actually get to see it.
Right. And like decide, is this gross?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about like the difficulty of the classes that you faced.
Okay.
It's very ironic to me to think of like the most brilliant 18-year-olds you can find getting 50% on their exams. Like that's crazy to me. And what I want to ask you is, for a lot of majors, if you fail a class, it sounds terrible, but you can bounce back.
Yeah.
Can you fail a class and bounce back in neuroscience?
You can, but it's one of those things. I think at Ohio State, you can only apply to the program twice. And then after that, they
Wow.
make you choose something else, which sounds really bad. And it's like, it's something where maybe if I just had one more chance, I could get into it. But also it's kind of smart too, because then you're not
Right.
necessarily wasting your time on something. And I think that's really important within neuroscience and the other biological sciences, or if you're thinking about a professional program or something like that, is yeah, you definitely have to be passionate about the subject, so you don't get burnt out. But you also have to kind of learn what your strengths are within that, and be willing to like, okay, this might change a little bit, because if it's really hard now, it might be something that you just don't want to deal with later. So really kind of recognizing what you're good at within that field, when picking like a specialization or what kind of courses you want to take, but also still like challenging yourself to kind of try new things too. So.
It's like stressful to think about for me. Like this is such a
It's not all bad.
it's so out of my wheelhouse. Like like I said before,
Yeah.
obviously I don't pursue math and science further than I need to. I mean, I enjoy anthropology, and that's the most sciencey thing that I enjoy.
Yeah.
And I even enjoy that to a certain extent. And then I'm like, okay, this is too much. It just isn't my thing. So like just hearing about all of this it's crazy to me.
It does sound crazy, and it does sound like a lot of work, but obviously if it's something you're really interested in, then definitely
Right.
go for it, because it is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about your major a little further, besides like the different classes that you take, are like internships, I mean, obviously you've talked about having like, different kinds of hands-on work. Do you want to talk about like internships or like different jobs that you have to satisfy any requirements or...
Yeah, so within our major, they usually look for, kind of like I've mentioned, volunteering hours, so upwards of like a few hundred hours of that, and then also shadowing. but also research experience. And I guess that would be more of like the internship within the neuroscience field would be a research position, which I think is very important, because if you're thinking like, hey, I want to pursue a PhD in neuroscience or something like that, and then you get into a lab where you're with rats or, mice or something like that, looking at their brains, and your first job is to have to kill the mice for that. Like it's a very something that you should just experience before you end up trying to put your whole career on it, pretty much. But I'd say research is definitely a big part. So I did research in an injury biomechanics lab on campus, which actually wasn't specifically neuroscience. So that's a thing too. It doesn't have to be a neuroscience research thing, because you can bring kind of what you learned about neuroscience into a lot of other aspects of science pretty much too.
Right.
So like mine was a lot of biomedical engineering students, so I was kind of felt out of place, but
Right.
one thing that you have to do, I think, within that is really be willing, even if you're like more of a introverted person like me, to really go to
Right.
somebody and be like, hey, I see that you're doing research about this, this is my major, I'm neuroscience, can I bring anything to that? So I actually did that with this lab to a guest speaker who had come to one of my scholars meetings, and he's like, yeah, I'm actually doing a project right now on subdural hematomas, so brain bleeding, which has nothing to do with the rest of their lab, but somehow they were doing it at that point. So you can find little openings like that too, but also with the whole research and internship type thing, be prepared as far as like reading up on the research, and that can include like reading all their papers or what questions they want to ask, because I know my principal investigator in my lab, he's like, students email me about wanting to be in the lab, but when they don't mention a paper that I've written, I won't ask them for an interview.
Okay, so it's very exclusive.
Yeah,
it's
so
very
definitely
selective.
read up, but also look for different opportunities like that. So that was the cadaver lab. So it was really cool because with that project, I was actually able to help practice different ways for taking an ultrasound of the brain. So then you're actually seeing it, on the screen, or you're with the different subjects and you actually get to see it in front of you. But also, you can use the internship or something, maybe more of a behavioral path type thing, or if you're doing a minor or something else, because then it just kind of adds more to your well-roundedness. So like you still want it to be something that you can relate it to somehow, but I just did an internship in Arizona this past summer at a diaper bank.
Yeah.
So completely, it seems unrelated. It's a nonprofit in Tucson, so they would go to all the different clinics, some of the hospitals, and other different nonprofits within Tucson, and distribute diapers and stuff to people who need them. And I did a research project on like the kind of why people need them, or how to better serve more families, because diaper poverty and period poverty and stuff like that is a super big issue within like the medical field almost. So kind of seeing how different moods of like the parents and that kind of stuff, which is all very behavioral type stuff, how that can affect their health in the end, and then they end up in a hospital and that kind of stuff. And I think it's also important to find if you're interested in working in a hospital, other different clinics or nonprofits and stuff too, because at the hospitals you only see the people that are coming into the hospital, and then they leave, and after that you don't know what happens to them.
Right.
Whereas if you're working more with the community, at some point you can kind of see, okay, like this is what's really happening. Maybe this person can't go to the hospital because they don't have the money, or because they're scared of something else. So really just look for an internship that you can bring back to where you can use neuroscience to almost explain it and to kind of help with your neuroscience courses, or just a research type thing if you're interested in that too.
So it doesn't always have to be like a one-to-one experience. It's
No,
all in like it's all in how you interpret what you've done.
Yeah.
Which is a skill in itself. Like getting an internship or getting a job that doesn't seem like it's related, and people are like,
well, why would you want to do that?
Yeah, like why'd you work at a diaper bank? You're like studying neuroscience, when in all reality, like absolutely you learned lots of things. It's just in how you apply it, and that's like really with anything. So like I know you talked about your experience in particular, but what are some of like the other like kind of weird research jobs or internships that people can get for like the medical field in general, I guess, but for neuroscience?
So a lot of people that are in my different classes are also have different like research positions and stuff like too. One of them is working in a lab that deals with maternal stress. It's really interesting.
Really?
And maternal stress and like how it affects gut health.
Oh.
And I wish I knew. Let me call them up real quick. Let me phone a friend.
Phone a friend. Oh my God.
But yeah, but they're using different mice models. But at this point, they're trying to figure out how to kind of get rid of the bad bacteria kind of thing. And I don't even know. So there's stuff like that. I know a lot of people try to get into the different cancer research just because it's so big right now. And, you know, there's a lot happening with that. So there's those sort of things.
Are there ever points where like any of your professors or advisors would say, okay, that's a little too abstract, like that's a little too far of a deviation?
Yeah, I guess maybe, I don't know though, because a lot of it you can tie back. I know that some person did more of like the neuroscience or like the psychology of music type thing.
That's
they
cute.
did with like different dances and stuff like that. So there's a lot that you can tie to, but I guess if you're like, hey, I'm going to go over to the business school and like work there this summer or something like that and learn about
go
marketing
work at a TV
or
station
this summer. Like it's cool, but which I know that like not necessarily just neuroscience, but the whole pre-med thing. I know that when I was coming into Ohio State, the big thing was you don't need to major in a science to go to medical school or to become pre-med, which is true, but also by the time
it's about getting accepted into
by the time you finish the pre-med requirements, which you would do in addition to your major, that's adding another like 30 to 50 credit hours onto that. You're kind of a science major, but I know that there were some different dance majors or that kind of stuff who just happened to tack it on. So pretty much just whatever you want to do, or it's kind of a good thing too, kind of how I went into it is I was never 100% committed to the whole medical school thing, but I obviously wanted to keep that as an option. And the good thing about it is once you finish those different requirements and stuff, and let's say you want to pursue a grad program or something like that, it's still an option. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that. They think that if you're going to medical school, you have to go right away, like the, fall or whatever after you graduate, and that's it. But I know at different...
It doesn't work like that. I mean, college in general doesn't work like that. I mean, it's what people think is ideal. And I actually talked about this last week with Spencer, but like a lot of people think like, okay, if I don't go to undergrad as soon as I graduate high school, then I'm never going to do it. If I don't go to grad school as soon as I graduate undergrad, like I'm never going to do it because I can't get motivated. I'm like, well, that speaks to your motivation of doing it in the first place. Like if it's something that really mattered to you, you can take a year off and come back just fine. So,
and I know that especially with, sorry, I just
it's okay.
When people talk about different medical school and stuff, obviously you need a very high GPA and like science GPA along with your just normal one and all the different classes and stuff. There is definitely that pressure that you need all those good grades right away. But I know, like I've talked to people who are actual like medical residents, so they're past medical school and they're just doing their residency right now, that are like, I ended up taking 3 years off after my undergrad to work, and my MCAT scores weren't good enough, and I didn't think I was going to do anything, but then I applied and I got in. It's one of those things where you have to use that time to really make it worth something, even if you're not going to school. Like maybe do some volunteering or just show that you're still maybe committed to that, but you also don't have to commit right away. Right. Because it's one of those paths that it's like once you're in it, you're in it. Like it's very hard to switch once you've gone, through 10 plus years of school. To be like, okay, after all that debt and stuff, like I want to switch to something else. So
like I want to be an accountant now or something.
Like there's still obviously like you can definitely do that, and that's never not an option, but it's something you really want to explore the major. And like neuroscience is a good thing where if you're thinking maybe medical school, but I don't really know, or I just like the medical field, like you could absolutely do nothing with it, just want a college degree and go for neuroscience just because because it's interesting. Yeah, it's such a cool major. I think.
It sounds interesting.
Yeah.
It's like again, so out of out of my
It's
realm.
really cool. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned something earlier, and I just want to double check. You don't have to technically be a pre-med major to get into med school.
Okay, so it's different at different colleges. I know that some actually have pre-med as a major.
Yeah.
So I don't know about, I mean, I assume
Like,
for
just-
that you would need it, but as far as like pre-med goes for like different applications, you just pretty much need the classes that they recommend. And so like Ohio
Okay.
State puts those all into like an add-on type thing that you would add to your
Okay.
major.
So
Yeah.
I could pursue neuroscience without the pre-med.
Oh yeah, you could just do neuroscience because you want to do neuroscience. Yeah.
Okay.
But,
for some
like-
reason I thought it was like built in and like you kind of not had to do that, but like that was
You
just
don't,
how it was.
but that's usually what you see. It's like at Ohio State, you know, the first day of like your neuro intro class or whatever, they're like, who's pre-PhD? And it's like half the class, and then who's pre-med, and it's the other half of the class.
Okay, I
But
see.
there definitely are some that are like, yeah, I just think the brain's cool. which
Oh,
which
God,
is,
I like that.
Yeah, or some people end up going on to nursing after because they're like,
Oh,
okay,
right.
I'd rather want more patient interaction type thing where, oh my gosh, I hate neuroscience. I need to switch to something else.
Right.
So
That's
yeah.
cool though that like you could either go to med school or go to the PhD school or do nursing because that's more in like what experience you want. But you
Yeah,
guys all
and-
begin with the same kind of baseline.
Yeah, and like there's definitely, I know, different jobs within the medical field that which I honestly couldn't name off the top of my head. What you can do with a neuroscience degree?
No, I
Because
don't blame
I
you.
guess I've always, for me at least, gone into it as like, this isn't where I want to end it. I want to go further, which is just up to, it's up to you.
It's up to you. No, but I do want to clarify with you. Since I don't necessarily have to have the pre-med little group of classes to go to med school,
I mean, you have
can
to take
I
them.
go to med school?
You'd have to take the classes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So if I do want to
like,
go to med school, I do have to have that. I can't just like take a test, do really well. And then
No. So if you decided to like drop everything
That would be
tomorrow
awful.
and pursue
yeah.
a degree in medicine or whatever, you could still do like what you're doing now. You
Yeah.
would just have chemistry.
A
Little dash of chemistry.
A little
some
dash.
Little
Oh my God.
smidgen of
Do you ever
physics.
see people that are like pursuing pre-med but aren't like in the sciences? Is that too far? Is that too
I
crazy?
mean, no, it's not, but I have not met a single
Yeah.
person yet.
I mean, that
know.
makes sense.
Yeah. But it's one of those things where it's like you definitely find out what general sciences you do and do not like. Like you get into chemistry, and I absolutely hated chemistry, and that's
Right.
just me. I like the lab part, but as far as like the lecture, no thank you. And then you meet like the chemistry pre-med people and you're like, wow,
Wow.
that's
What do chemistry
That's
pre-med people do? Do they do anything in particular, or is it just kind of like a wide range of?
they do chemistry.
They do. I mean, they,
That's
they
all
do.
they do.
Do they take like a PhD route or like a med route?
I honestly don't know. They just do chemistry.
They just do chemistry.
That's what I see.
They just
yeah.
have beakers and
Yeah,
fizzy chemicals, I assume.
Yeah, it was funny.
Goggles.
One of the people I met in my first general chemistry course, which at Ohio State, that is like the weed out course.
Yeah.
Like that they.
I think that is this way.
Yeah.
Like at
a
OU
lot,
too.
I'm sure at a lot of
I'm
places.
not sure because I never had to take it.
But like, it's sad. And it's obviously a very good learning experience, and you learn about your studying and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, it's designed to fail the people who really
Right.
don't want to do it or really aren't.
Mhm.
I don't even know, but it's
They
bad,
don't have
but
the grit.
Yeah, yeah, the perseverance.
Oh,
But
man.
I know that when I first took it, like you don't take that class unless you have to. And the guy that was my lab partner, he was like an exploratory major that year, and
Oh.
he's like, I thought it was a fun class, and just decided to sign.
So funny.
So if that's you, then that's great. That's fantastic.
I'm glad you like pain.
Good for you. But yeah, you definitely find out a lot about
Mm-hmm.
science in general,
Mhm.
and that's just the pre-med part.
Mhm.
But also, like my minor is is in women's
Yeah.
gender and sexuality studies. So like I would say if you have the time, and obviously if you don't, or you don't want to like over stress yourself, like I think it's cool too, because then you especially if you're in the science majors, that's all you see.
Right.
Like, even with your different GEs, usually at that point you gear them towards, oh, that's kind of sciencey, I'm going to take that one.
Right.
But, like, as far as my experience, I'm going into my 3rd year, and I've taken maybe 2 general ed courses.
Can't relate.
Yeah. So, but, like, if not for just wanting maybe, like, a career that also involves your minor, use it as, like, a break.
Right.
Almost. Like, going to those classes and stuff like that is, one, very interesting and, like, very passionate about the topic too, but also, like, it's such a different feeling than going into a lab for 4 hours and just like working on one experiment that's like, oh, at the end you have 0% yield, and then you just have to leave after that knowing you can't fix it or something. So it's a very good balance, and I think everybody should find something, whether it's like different extracurriculars and stuff like that. You can make them medically related, which I know a lot of people tend to go towards, like, I want to be in a neuroscience club or something like that. But also find some fun things too, because it's a very stressful environment a lot of the time.
For a lot of the majors that I've covered on this podcast, a lot of people also recommend having some sort of outlet that's like a weird thing that like doesn't relate to anything. Like like I mentioned before, I had band, which was kind of like a cool outlet that I had that was much different than what I pursued. You know, you have women's studies, that you take those classes and that's a breath of fresh air for you. It's cool to see how different people have the different outlets. It looks very different. You like yoga?
Yeah, but I'm actually a neuro ambassador or mentor or whatever for incoming students that like come into the major at Ohio State, and they're always like, you know, I want to get involved in research right now, or like I'm already volunteering and stuff, and that's great, and we help them find those different opportunities and stuff like that. But then it's like, well, I know one of the girls was like, I'm interested in joining the Disney club or whatever, but you know, it doesn't have anything to do with anything else. So
do it anyway.
Yeah, and that's what, because then they think that since it doesn't relate specifically, they can never do those things. And then suddenly school is not fun because you're looking at the same thing every day, and you're worried, oh my gosh, I didn't get into this research lab. What am I going to do? It'll all
join
out.
Disney Club.
Join Disney Club. I'm not involved in it.
That's something that
sure
you could spin. I'm doing this for neuroscience because
it's all
it all makes sense.
I mean, you made the decision,
right?
Your brain made the decision.
So you can think about it with your brain. Wow, this is like really meta.
You don't even have to be a neuroscience to major
to be a neuroscientist.
Yeah, you can. We're all neuroscientists.
Throw your college away, Sydney. You're done.
I'm done.
You're done.
This has been eye-opening.
So, like, what kind of student orgs have you done? Yeah.
Yes. I definitely came into it with anything that says neuro, I'm gonna do.
Right.
Which was definitely cool, because I guess one of the good things about joining an organization like that is you find other people within that major. Because I know my roommates my first year, one was like pre-vet, and the other one started out as public health. And so they're still similar, but nobody really understands kind of like the different classes and that kind of stuff, or like what it takes, you know, to study for those. So that is one good thing. You can find other people within that major, and especially upperclassmen within that major, to be like, what should I take? Or, you know, how do I talk to my professor about getting a letter of rec, or how do I go to office hours because I hate talking, you know, like that kind of stuff. So it's definitely good. And then a lot of times the professors do, you know, go to those different meetings or help, like, you know, how you need like a sponsor almost, or whatever, to start a club. So you can meet faculty through that, which is also really good. So I was involved in like the brain club.
I didn't know that at all.
That's raising awareness in neuroscience.
Oh my God, was that their little slogan?
Yeah, I had a sweatshirt that said brain, and a lot of people just thought it, you know, said Brian when you look at it, because, you know, It's easy to
Why
get
would you have a
mixed
shirt
up.
that said
But
Brian? But then again, why would you have a shirt that said brain?
yeah, with a big like Buckeye on the front.
Oh, did it look like a brain?
Half of it was brain and half of it was Buckeye.
Perfect.
It's my brain. Half Buckeye, half.
That's
Go
what you
Bucks.
get when you sign up.
Anyway, and then I was
God.
is called undergraduate neuroscience outreach
Mm-hmm.
organization, something like that. So pretty much there, you go to maybe some of the different clinics and stuff like that on campus. You talk about really cool things within the major. So it's like if I just talked about like traumatic brain injury or something like that in one of my classes, maybe I want to learn about different signs to, like, if you see somebody pretty much laying on like the side of the road or something like that, like maybe you can have a better idea of what's happening to them or what happened to them based on if it's like a neurological thing, and then know how to respond with like calling. I don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of different things. I was also part of the period club at Ohio State, which I don't know if you know. I think there's one at OU, kind of similar to
There's
that.
a similar club, but it's not quite the same because I believe your club was like a
It's part of,
division of
like-
like a national
Yes.
organization.
Yeah.
Ours, when I was a part of it, I don't think it was a division of anything. It was like
Its own little.
yeah, ours was, it was more about providing tampons across campus.
Okay, yeah.
So like in the different like academic buildings in the women's restroom, the club would put out a basket, and it was like a take a tampon, leave a tampon basket.
Okay.
So basically they would initially stock it with like period products, and in theory, like every time you go to the bathroom, if you had an extra product, you would like put it in the basket. But the issue is nobody did that. So like people just kind of take the products and then leave.
Yeah.
But actually since then they partnered with Aunt Flo, which is like
that's from Columbus, right?
yeah. It's like a Columbus company that makes like organic period products and stuff, but like they keep it fully stocked
Nice.
now. So like it's not even take a tampon, leave a tampon. It's
Take one.
take Aunt Flo, take
two.
it all. I actually took some when I didn't need it just because I was curious. It was fully stocked, okay? It was a bathroom
So it
no one
wasn't the
used.
last one, okay.
No, I took
Yeah,
no,
so
but yeah.
that's
Your club was different.
Yeah, like it's definitely getting the different period products into all the dorms and stuff like that, especially to the more like public buildings on campus and stuff, when they say like they're supposed to be stocked all the time, and then you walk in and there's nothing. You're like, So is that. And then also talking about Ohio still has the pink tax or the tampon tax or whatever you want to call that, the luxury tax. So it's also very policy based. So I did that.
I remember when you first joined it. Did you?
It
Were
was
you?
wild.
Were you a part of the group that started it
At Ohio State?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I remember that because like you guys started the Twitter account, and I don't go to OSU obviously, but like to support you, I like followed it on Twitter, and and
My
then
number one fan.
it's not like they would tweet a whole lot.
No.
But you guys tweeted about policy a lot, which was
Yeah.
mostly kind of what I kept following for. But every once in a while, the account would tweet about like goings on at OSU, and I'm like, why am I getting this on my feed? And then you're not a part of the group anymore, so
No.
I
and
unfollowed in solidarity. But
that's
also, I
another
don't need
story.
any information about OSU.
No.
Don't need any of that information.
No, but it was just one of those things too where it's like find a club too, but if also it's good to stick with something. Like it's one thing definitely if you don't like it, don't waste your time in it. But also like especially if you're looking for maybe a leadership position or something like that, really stay in like one or two things maybe, and just grab a friend and see how it goes, and do
Right.
some fun stuff.
And you will be surprised at how quickly you can move up in these student orgs because
Oh,
people
yeah.
come and go so quickly.
Yeah.
Like my friend Jada, who was actually on the podcast. I'm just really circling around a lot today. But Jada, she was in one of like the feminist organizations on campus, and she just kind of went to every meeting.
Yeah.
Or most of every meeting, and literally by her sophomore year she was the president of the organization. Like
That's
literally
impressive.
just sticking around and just
Yeah.
getting
if-
involved as much as you can. You don't have to exert yourself like a crazy
No.
amount to be I mean, not to say that these people don't do hard work.
But like, yeah,
it's easy to move up a lot of the time. So just kind of stick around.
Yeah, and if anything, for public speaking or just finding a friend or something like that. And like, I guess the thing to remember with all that too is they're all college students. They're all doing stuff. Every major is busy in its own way. So
yeah,
it's not impossible.
I remember like my first week of undergrad here. I don't know if I want to tell this story, but I already started telling it anyway. So like I mentioned all the time, I was in band at OU, and it was like right around the time that school was starting. I don't think school had started yet, but I ran into a friend that we went to high school with who was in band, Sam.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I ran into him.
Shout out to Sam.
Yeah. And I saw him, and I remember saying, like, he was with somebody else, too. Maybe he was his roommate or something. I'm not sure. But I was like, hey, why didn't you do band or something? Because he always was in band. He was always involved. So I was kind of surprised that he didn't, it was his own decision not to do band. I truly don't care. I was just asking. I was like, hey, why didn't you do band? And then he's like, oh, I don't know. Like, and it's fully okay to just say, I'm not interested anymore, and then not do it. But he was just kind of like, I don't know. And I was giving him a hard time for it. And then the guy who was with him was like, we're engineering majors. We have a heavy course load. I was like, shut up. Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay,
I've never been able to justify that ever, because literally every major is busy in their own way.
Oh my gosh, and I know.
I'm not doubting that,
it's just,
they had a heavy course load.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who have heavy course loads. It was just like, I don't know, just the way that he said it was just like,
no, but
cool.
The sad part about that is you totally run into that, especially with the STEM major. So if you become a STEM major, be nice. Understand because
Stay humble.
you seriously have those other people that are like, oh my gosh, well, they're a business student, so of course they have time to go and do all this kind of stuff, and like of course they are able to add on all these extracurriculars and stuff like that, but that's just not how it is. Like, and part of the thing is, it's like, okay, well, part of the reason it's so busy is because that's how the job is. Yeah. It's such a heavy course load too. Like, even after, it's not like you're going to get done with undergrad and be like, oh my gosh, now that I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to have all kinds of time on my hands, and that kind of stuff. It's just
the free life of a doctor.
It's just the nature of the thing.
Yeah.
But if you do it to where you block yourself off to other things, then it's not going to be fun, because you're only going to be worrying about, your science classes or your engineering and that kind of stuff. But there's more to life.
Right. And I have a friend who's a nursing major, and like, she kind of put it in perspective for me. I mean, obviously I can't speak for people in STEM or people in medicine at all, but like, from what I understand is like, busy looks different between you and I. So like, I'm a journalism student. I can finish a news story and know that it's finished and set it aside and say that that's done. But people in nursing and people in medicine, people in STEM, their homework isn't a project, it's studying. Yeah. And you can always keep studying.
Oh my gosh.
There's no like end point to it. Like, you can't just like hit submit and be done. It's just studying. So like, busy looks different.
Oh yeah. And
depending on,
like, listening to you talk about some of the different things you've had to do, and like, I'm taking a bunch of science courses, but I don't think I've ever had to write like a full paper so far.
Super
like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, oh my gosh, you're so busy, and then you sat down like, here, write this 10-page paper, and I'd be like, what?
Right.
Excuse me.
I'm like, give me a Tuesday night, I'll get it done. And same here. There have been very few classes where I've had to sit and study, and like, if I do have those classes, it was like anthropology. Yeah. But like, as far as like journalism classes and stuff, it's more about doing than studying, because like, it's more about like habits and repetition. Yeah. Mostly.
But the thing with neuroscience and pre-med and all that kind of stuff is, it's great, it's fun. obviously it's busy and stuff. Good times, but don't go into it for the wrong reasons. Because I feel like a lot of people do because they think it's science. I think science is cool, but then like if you hate it, then don't keep on doing it. Or if you're like, okay, I want to do it because one of the career paths could make me like I could make a lot of money in that, don't go into it for the money, because you'll be the most unhappy person in the entire world.
There's lots of ways to make money.
Oh my gosh.
You don't have to do that to make money.
No. And so I feel like a lot of people too, if they're like, oh, well, at least I'll be making a lot of money, you won't have time to go.
You won't have time to spend the money.
You really like, just have to think about, like, it's great. And obviously people have, like, doctors and stuff have time where they can, you know, do other things and that kind of stuff. But don't go into it for that reason, or especially if, like, your parents are doctors or something like that. Like, that's great, but there's so much more to that. Like, definitely explore it if you're thinking about it, because it is a really cool field. But, like, the whole, like, the pathology thing I'm interested in, that's 2 years of grad school and stuff. So, like, that to me seems more of like the lifestyle choice I want to make, because, you know, I'm still doing the dissection type stuff. I'm still interested, you know, in that field, but you really have to think, and I know it's a lot to think about, especially as an undergrad, because you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing like next week.
Right.
Do put some thought into it, because you don't want to get stuck into something that you're miserable with.
Yeah. And with that, is there stigma in choosing one path over the other?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
Like, I think definitely pre-med is like the way.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like a lot of people think that. Yeah. Or like, if you hear somebody say like, oh my gosh, I'm a pre-med major, you know, and stuff, cool. But everyone's obviously like, whoa, like, whoa. And it's a very cool thing. And it's, you know, it is a challenging path, but there is more to that. And I know that because technically I'm still pre-med, because you need all the same courses to go to the different grad programs. So everything that I've taken is going to be put to use in applying for a master's. And then if I want to do medical school after that, hey, I still can. I just have to take the MCAT and make sure everything's still up to date and that kind of stuff. But being a doctor isn't the only job in the medical field. And I feel like a lot of people think that, oh my gosh, you know, I'm not sure about this, I'm not doing very well in my classes, I can't do anything in the medical field. Like, you totally can. Look up different programs or other different career paths. And when I like emailed my advisor and stuff, I'm like, I'm interested in applying for this grad program, that kind of stuff, I was weirdly almost like disappointed in myself, which is terrible, because it's one of those things where, you know, all throughout high school I'm like, okay, this is what I want to do, like, you know, but you don't, and you have to be okay, even though it's like super uncomfortable when you might be disappointed. It's like, okay, well, eventually I'm not going to be happy. So really being able to be in touch with yourself. No, but for real, like, really look into it. And if you're not happy with it, or even if you're not sure about it, it's okay to switch. It's totally okay to switch. And that goes, you know, the other way too. Like, if you come in as nursing, or even as like a completely different major, and you're like, okay, I want to take some pre-med courses and just kind of see, and you end up really liking it, like, good for you for switching to that. But it's not for everyone, and that's an important thing. There are so many other things within that out there. Not that it isn't a good career choice, because there are a lot of cool things, but it's not the only thing out there.
Do you want to share that story for me, if you feel comfortable, about like pre-med major switching to law?
Oh yeah, so
it makes me laugh.
So like, obviously not that anybody would know anybody, but
right,
not naming names or anything. It's, which I don't know, obviously, like how even true this is. It might just be something somebody heard from
I would
somebody
believe
else.
That it happens, though.
Oh yeah, but so like there is like a stereotype that, I mean, if you look, a lot of people are applying to medical school. It's getting a lot more competitive. College is getting a lot more competitive, it seems like, which is stressful. But going into medical school, it's like, law school is obviously another professional program that you can go into, but not as many people apply to law school as applying to medical school. So I was at one of my like intro classes, and they're like, well, if medical school doesn't work out for you, just apply to law school because it's easier to get into.
Oh my God. That's so funny.
And yeah, so there's more out there than doctors and lawyers. They're great.
That's what I was gonna say. I'm like, if you ask your grandparents what professions are, they're like doctor, lawyer, teacher. Like that's pretty much it. And like, obviously, there's like the I don't want to say a stereotype because I think it's true of like doctors and lawyers being paid a fair amount.
Yeah, and that is a very real thing.
That like shows me that there are a lot of people who are in it for the money.
Yes.
More than they're in it for like, you know, enjoying it because they want to help people, because they want to study this, because they think it's interesting. They're just like, I want to be prestigious and rich. Which like, I mean, I guess is a valid excuse, but like that wouldn't make you happy.
Well, it's not like it's a job that you can put like a couple hours into a day and be like, okay, I'm done. Right. You don't really realize that until you get into it. But I mean, like if you took a law class and you're like, I love the law, then then, you know, good for you. Switch by all means. And like if you do, you know, go the pre-med route and then you're like, law school sounds pretty cool too. Or maybe if you can't decide between one and you got into law school instead of medical school, or you got into medical school instead of law school, then good. But yeah, don't switch because somebody tells you to, or because it's easy to get into, because it's not going to be easy.
It's still
to
not
get
easy.
Into.
Like it's just not.
Nothing, like, I don't know, if you go
it's
into
hard
it like
in different ways.
Yeah.
Oh God. So I think that's a wonderful segue for me to ask you, what type of people major in neuroscience or in pre-med?
Well,
because I have a picture in my head.
And yeah, I think everybody gets that picture.
Yeah.
You know, the super nerdy person, but the person who also was that one in high school who was super competitive, you know, about grades, and oh my gosh, if they failed something, it was the end of the world.
And maybe their parents were in it before.
Yeah, and so since my mom and dad were doctors, then I'm going to be a doctor because that's what I know and that's what I'm comfortable with, which if you end up doing that, that's obviously valid.
Right. If it's something that you want to do, but don't let legacy be the only reason.
Yeah. So that is definitely like a stereotype, and honestly, it's kind of true.
Yeah.
You get those people, but I mean,
it's worth noting you're not that person.
Oh, thanks.
I don't parents think were not doctors.
My parents are not doctors. They didn't tell me to become a doctor. No, but I think ultimately those people though end up in every major, just kind of masked differently.
Right.
But I would say to be a neuroscience major, to be a pre-med major, you have to be comfortable with failure, which honestly I was not. High school was, which I know everybody has different experiences. High school was relatively easy for me.
Right.
No problems. You know, it's just kind of something I did and I got through. And because of that, I wasn't ready for my first like college failure.
Yeah.
And that definitely took a while to be like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm worthless and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Like I'm never going to be able to succeed in a class like this, especially, you know, coming from different high schools where you're prepared differently, whereas some are like set you up pretty much for that specific type of major. So you have to be comfortable with that, and you also have to be open to change.
Yeah.
Especially maybe things won't work out or you want to switch to something else. You know, also you have to like science. That's pretty that's a given.
Yeah. And I want to reinforce, like, one of the reasons that I started this podcast is I wanted people to know how accessible things were. And when I came into the journalism program, I didn't think that I was going to get in because I didn't go to a prestigious high school. I didn't have a school newspaper. I didn't have any of that. You know, Sydney and I went to high school together, and we went to a pretty modest high school. It was small, and it had kind of your basic classes. We didn't get AP classes until like what, our senior year? Junior year.
I don't know, but
something
even then, there weren't
right.
tons.
There weren't tons, and you know, we didn't have a whole lot of that. We didn't come from like a big city that had like a whole lot of funding and stuff like that. We went to a very basic high school, and there was nothing wrong with that. We got what we needed to get from that.
Yeah.
And you were still able to get into a pretty prestigious program for medicine. I think OSU is a wonderful, world-renowned school for medicine.
Yeah,
you were
and research in general.
And research. And
Yeah.
you were able to do that without going to some, you know, hoity-toity school with, you know,
Yeah.
programs where you can, you know, kind of be conditioned from an early age to do that. You were able to do that on your own.
Yeah.
And I think that's something worth noting.
Yeah, well,
Congratulations.
congratulations, you two. We made it.
We did it, man.
So I think one of the important things too is if you don't go to like a super fancy or super specialized high school or something too, you are going to see that once you get into the program, but you can't let it bother you.
Right.
Because honestly, there's nothing that you can change at that point. Like you had what you had different experiences than what that person did. And after that, like maybe you just have to find a different study technique or something like that. Or maybe you do have to fail a couple times before you're like, okay, this is how I need to prepare. This is how I need to do my homework or something like that. So you are going to notice it, and it just don't let it bother you kind of thing.
And if for a second you start to think like, somehow I'm not on the same level as this person because they had that advantage, because of this, because that, remember that you were able to do it just the same that they were.
You both got into the
You
program.
both got into the same program.
Yeah.
Who says that you weren't chosen before they were chosen?
You can do it.
Who says you
That's the
believe in
key.
yourself?
Yes. Neuroscience, believe in yourself. It's good. That's the motto.
Oh God. All right. I think let's go into the final phase of the conversation. So, you know, we've talked about neuroscience, and the listener is sold. They need to major in neuroscience.
Welcome to Neuro.
Welcome to Neuro.
It's a pleasure to have you.
So, what does, and of course you can only speak to your experience, but what does the admission process look like?
To neuroscience?
To neuroscience or to pre-med or to whatever.
Yeah. So you want to major in neuroscience. You pick your school.
So you want them?
Everyone's going to
You
want to
sounded
major
like,
in neuroscience now.
What's this? Oh gosh. What? Like a middle school science teacher. Do you
Yeah.
remember the tall one? He was like, you dropped a rock on your pet frog.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I know. Yeah. So you want to major in
Failed union
neuroscience.
students know. Okay, go ahead.
You want to major in neuroscience. It's the best major ever, obviously. So you're going to pick that.
Yeah.
Because it's cool.
It's wonderful.
Honestly, there isn't a whole lot. One thing I would recommend is if the program, or like if there is a specific neuroscience program, like I know we were looking at Ohio University, it's a specialization to the biological sciences degree.
Yeah.
But it's one of those not weird majors, but kind of like more specific than your average major, to where sometimes they have like their own open houses and stuff like that. Like that's what I went to, because I was actually going between Ohio State and University of Michigan. Sad rivals. I'm not.
I kind of forgot about that, and that's hilarious.
Fan, just to point that out. So I really don't care. I know.
I remember you
it's
had
Michigan.
you went to a visit to, because OSU and Michigan are like just sworn enemies for anybody who isn't aware of this.
I love them both. I'm academic fans of both.
Academic fans. And I remember one time you, like after you had visited Michigan and you were wearing a Michigan shirt to school, and we went to band practice, and you were getting harassed.
Yeah, bad stuff. Yeah, and like it was one of those things where, you know, I applied to both. I got accepted to both.
Congratulations.
But thank you. So you want to major in neuroscience. You've
Listen
applied
to-
to two
listen to the
schools.
best.
You've got accepted to 2 schools. No, but the thing that really sold me is I went to an actual neuroscience open house at Ohio State.
Yeah.
So there, you know, they tell you about the program. They tell you about the courses you're taking. So then you get a better idea of like, okay, it's not just like the brain part 1, the brain part 2. Now we're going to move on to the spinal cord. Like,
oh my God.
You get a better idea of the course load, especially if you're interested in adding something else, whether it's like a minor or a pre-professional specialization or whatever. Definitely look into that. And a lot of them have like sample schedules of what it would look like with that added to it, which I think is very important to look at. And then they let me hold a brain.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Like
at the open house.
A
Like they
real,
brought out a brain.
Not a model, not a fake.
No. They brought out a brain.
Did you wear gloves?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
good.
Of course. Always.
I'm like, that's gross.
Biohazard.
Did you just have to? You were like going out the like room, like turning the knob, like
Or
oh
tossing it
man,
around. Yeah. They
my
brought
hands
out.
are so slippery. I can't turn the knob.
They brought out the brain, and that sold me.
Oh my god.
Well, it's just one of those things where it's like you're holding it, and you're like, okay, that's personality, that's emotion, that's everything. And that's what I really liked about my research lab too, is you really get to see you in like a weird way. So like being able to see that and like learn about the different courses and that it's all contained within like that in the spinal cord, I'm like, yep, this is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're questioning it, I'm sure they still have them. I'm sure they still have the brain. It's probably preserved. So go to Ohio State,
that brain.
touch the brain, and you will be sold too. No. Yeah. And then also, like obviously ACT scores and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There isn't where you have to be like, science, I had a perfect score. Or science, like it was my highest. Because science was not my highest. And
wait, really?
It really wasn't.
What was your highest?
English was or the reading or whatever was
my
highest.
No.
Whatever, not the writing.
No.
Was English part of the...
There was English, and then there was reading, and then there was writing that was optional.
Okay, English. It wasn't writing.
English was my highest. Reading was my lowest. I don't know why. I get anxious when I have to read. I don't know how to explain it, but like tests like that have like the passage and I get anxious. So I remember one time I think I got like a 30 in English and then like a 17 in reading.
So
I'm like, was this the same person? We don't know.
But yeah, it wasn't, and that goes to say like you can like science and still like be, you know, good at it or decent at it, but it doesn't have to be like your star subject or something like that, because like obviously you have to be willing to work hard, but if you're passionate about it and you know, and that's enough to like really want to make you work for it, then by all means neuroscience. No, but it definitely, like, it was one of my higher ones, but wasn't my top pick. But I don't think that really had anything to do with picking it. Like, really just, I wouldn't even use it to like guide what you want to do, because it's like it depends, or like it determines parts of college acceptances, but honestly it's like time management.
Right.
That's a big part of it. Like, it obviously does require. Yeah, but this isn't about the ACT.
It's been
I'm
so
not
long.
qualified to talk about this.
I like kind of want to take the ACT for shits and gigs, you know, just to see. I probably would do so much worse now.
I feel like I would too.
Yeah, because I'm not like conditioned.
Oh,
what?
But the thing, I just thought of something. We're gonna backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
So the whole science thing, neuroscience, pre-med, I don't have to take a math class.
What?
I have to take a psych stats class.
Oh.
But that's it. So if you're like,
that's so
pre-med
weird.
requires, I think calculus or something like that. But that is like one of the AP classes that were offered, and so I just took it, and I got credit.
You lucky duck.
Ask to make sure if you got credit, because I didn't even look up my scores, and I signed up for calculus, and I went in, and my advisor's like,
I didn't know we had AP calculus.
we did. There were like 4 people. Shout out to Sam again. He was in AP calculus.
Sam, the real star of this episode.
Yes, but no. So if you can get through math, but you don't necessarily like it,
no worries.
that's okay. Like, you don't, like, it's not going to be, I have to take 5 math classes if I want to do neuroscience. I mean, if you go into more of the computational, then sure. But
I mean, I guess you just learn the math that you need to know.
yeah, and like you have to do math for chemistry and stuff, but they give you a calculator.
You have a calculator
you have
in
a
real life.
calculator in real life.
Wow.
They don't take that away from you.
Is that just an OSU thing? I truly...
I mean, I'm sure there's classes where they're like not allowed to or whatever, but...
The last time I took a math class, I think I was 16. I'm not kidding. I took it at Ohio University Lancaster.
And do you feel like you're lacking?
Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Oh, no, I'm just kidding. I feel like I'm doing all right.
Yeah,
I do
I'm
have
doing
to take,
okay right now.
I have to take a statistics class this year.
Yeah.
Which I don't know why I put that off for so long, because
it's...
I'm going on 21. I haven't taken a math since I was 16, and now I'm got to start back up again.
So yeah, math. But it's not the end
Math.
all. So if you're like, on math, like it's not really my thing, or I'm not really that interested in it, that doesn't, like, don't let that stop you from doing something that sounds like it would have math.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it
I would
does,
have
but
thought
it's
that
not
had
like,
math.
you think it would have a lot more.
So do your math scores matter when you apply?
I mean, I'm sure it counts as
Like, it counts
like
as
the
something,
overall,
but that's not what they're, like,
but I
zeroed
don't
in
think
on.
they look at it as in like,
Okay. Like, this is the
math. Yeah.
This is the make or break.
Which is still, it's cool. Math is cool. People who like math are cool. I like math.
Trying to appease the nerds
Yes,
out there.
Yes.
So you're talking about deciding between the two universities.
Yes.
What should people look for when they're trying to find what university they want to study neuroscience at?
Research is a big thing,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of places are going to be like, we offer, research opportunities and that kind of stuff, which is great. And I'm sure a lot of places do, but really look into that. Like, where can I do it? What type of research are they doing? Does that even sound interesting to me? Because at some point or another, you're probably going to be looking for some sort of research opportunity. So I would look for that. Another thing, it's kind of funny. I have a family member who is a neurosurgeon, was a neurosurgeon.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, and that is not the reason I decided to do neuroscience, for everybody who's wondering. Because it's funny.
You're a legacy. I know you are.
I'm not. I promise I'm not. So he's retired now. It's actually my uncle, but it's funny because when he was talking about it, he's like, pick a school that, sounds interesting to you and has like good research opportunities and that kind of stuff. But also, if you're looking to go on further to something, make that the school of like whatever. Because Michigan, out of state tuition is crazy expensive, and like
it's almost not worth it unless you're going to like an amazing school with great scholarships. It's just
and
like how different could it be from the school that you have it in your
and you
state?
don't want to make money, obviously, like determine what school do you go to, but ultimately it kind of does determine where you go to, especially if you're talking like $60,000 a year or whatever.
That's
so
a lot.
Look for the best that you can find, but not even just within the science, just with everything that you'd be more comfortable with, because obviously if you're in an environment that you're not comfortable with, or you're too far away from home, or you're too close to home or something like that, you're not going to learn it.
Yeah.
So just kind of balance it out, but I'd say definitely look for research.
Mm-hmm.
Or like a hospital or something nearby that you could volunteer at, or something.
Mm-hmm. Good to know.
Yeah, so now that you're switching to
now that I'm
neuroscience,
switching, I get to look at all my different
she'll be joining me in Columbus this fall.
All right,
This
guys.
is the
Sorry,
last
it's the
episode.
end of the podcast. So do you have any other advice for people who want to apply, or people who are going into neuroscience?
I think
Any parting thoughts?
it's cool. It's so cool. I feel like I didn't really talk about neuroscience a lot as I talked about like pre-med, because it tends to like take up all of your time rather than neuroscience.
Yeah.
But it's such a cool major.
Mm.
Like, so if you're looking for something cool, look no further.
Look, no, this is
Neuroscience.
it. This is the end.
Yeah, and I'd say just kind of like how I mentioned earlier, pick what you like and what you're passionate about, and find your strengths, and be open to change.
That was beautiful.
Thanks. I need to listen to myself.
And with that,
No,
I think
for
it's a
real.
wonderful place to end the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on, traveling all this way.
It's nice to be in Athens.
It's nice to meet you. This is her first time in
This is my
Athens. I'm
first-
going to show her around. I'm going to go take her to lunch. We're going to have a great time.
Yes. Part 2 will be coming at lunch.
Part 2.
Just kidding.
We'll do a follow-up episode when she gets into grad school.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be cute. If I did like a sequel to this podcast, but it's like grad school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after that, just life updates.
Life, right?
Every
Podcast.
few years or
Let's
so.
find your career.
Yeah. Question mark?
All right. Well, Thank you for coming on. And thank you guys for listening so much to Let's Find Your Major. If you have any suggestions, questions, anything you want to say to me, we do have an email. You can find me at letsfindyourmajor@gmail.com. And then you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, both at findyourmajor. If you want to follow me, your host, Jamie, you can find me on Instagram at Danny Clarkson, DANNICLARKSON. And then you can find me on Twitter at NotReallyDanny. DANNI.
But it is really.
But it is really Dan. I mean, in a way, it's really Dan. Oh, gosh. Well, thank you guys for listening. Also, I do want to say I'm trying to upload a new episode every Monday. So it'd be like #Major Monday.
Oh, that's good.
But in the next couple of weeks, we're transitioning from like the summer semester to the fall semester. So there might be a really weird transition period then. So I'll do my best. If you want to, I guess, yeah, follow the Twitter for updates and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go Bucks.
Go.
Oh, excuse me. Bobcats. We love everyone.
Yay,
here.
college.
Yay. Let's find
All
your
right.
major.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.